Time to abandon ship.
Oh no!
Here we go.
Can I persuade you to join us for a drink? It's a tradition.
Here, here.
Jar Jar, homie, my main man, quickly. Before the Separatists attack, get into the escape pod.
Hey! This is escape, then we're the pod.
Welcome back to Star Wars Escape Pod and our What Happened episode for Boba Fett. One of the biggest Star Wars characters in the franchise, in the saga, and of course our What Happened subseries is a great series for just discovering, beginning to end, the story arc of a character. We take all forms of canonicity appearances, going from comics to books to video games, TV shows, and animations, and the movies, of course. So let's dive into the character of Boba Fett, starting with his appearances prior to Attack of the Clones, and we have myself and Blake to do that. So let's do it.
Another happy landing.
All right, here we are.
Here we are.
Boba Fett. I mean, this is a character that, well, I mean, we were only chatting about Boba Fett with Jess from the Boba Fett fan club.
Yeah,
seems
that's right.
to be almost a week ago now, or 2 weeks ago almost. But that was a fun conversation. I like
That was a lot
with
of
her.
fun. Yeah, that was pretty
great.
good. I'm excited to watch the series, then get back in touch with her and see what you thought of it.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah, and an open invite as well to the fan club's founder Aaron as well. Hoping maybe next time he can join us if he's got the time. But Boba Fett is this character that's just always kind of had this lasting effect on people, and I mean we've had
The jetpack.
Yeah, it's the jetpack, man. It's the cool factor. But like, he's got a tremendous amount of story from a character who only had like between 6 and 8 something minutes of footage in these original trilogy films, and going from that to endless comic books with him in it, and then the Clone Wars, of course, and the prequels, and just kind of the legacy that character's left for even other characters to kind of do. It's pretty nuts. And part of what we've been doing in the What Happened sub-series, I guess, is trying to cover what happened with these characters in the best way possible throughout all the times that they showed up, because Star Wars canon is such a weird, unique, and cool thing at the same time, because to fans of the movies, it's a very incomplete picture a lot of the time to a lot of what goes on. And yes, you get your individual stories that kind of create the saga that we all know and love. And
that's just how George liked to do it, right? He liked to jump right into the middle.
Yeah, I like to jump into the middle, or to where kind of the story counts, and to skip over other things that a lot of us, crazy hardcore fans love to know about the details, right? You just kind of let authors and other storytellers fill in the gaps, I guess, at Lucasfilm. And then when Disney took over, this whole Canon initiative happened, and pretty much everything they've been putting out since 2014 has kind of remained true to itself, and every story has tried to kind of cross over or interweave with other stories a lot better than what it used to be before. And with Boba Fett, of course, being such a big character, it's kind of hard, and it's easy to lose track of where he's popped up and when things have happened, and it's like, what was he doing between these two movies, and what was he doing between those two movies, and
Plus, now you got the
questions.
split. You got the split between canon and EU. So a lot of people
Yeah.
remember the old EU stuff and not realize it's been replaced.
Yeah, exactly. So today I've been reading a whole bunch of stuff that I haven't been able to catch up on for a while, and I was thankful I was finally able to catch up on some of the comic books and everything. And we've now got a very complete idea as to where this character has been ever since prior to Attack of the Clones, all the way up until the Book of Boba Fett, and we're gonna talk about it right now. So let's start off with a few. Actually, I had some friends send in a few questions about Boba Fett and just general kind of things that I guess other people might wonder as well. So one of the first questions sent in by Ellen is actually it was sorry, one sec. Oh, what was he doing before Attack of the Clones? And the first thing that I have on the list actually answers that question. So it's a comic book called Age of Republic Jango Fett, and is included in the trade paperback volume called Age of Republic. So I'll just read this quick here and then we can talk about it. Boba joins his father Jango on a mission for training purposes. Jango is teaching him about the unknown factor in a mission and preparing for the unexpected and trusting instincts. The crew that they work with betray the Fetts and take Boba hostage, but he pulls a blaster and kills 2 of the members of the team, leaving one of them alive to tell the others what happened so no one crosses a Fett. And then there's a little quote here that I wrote down. A father could never ask for a better start for his son's legacy. And this was something that Jango said to Boba in the comic, and I thought that was pretty cool.
It's true.
And then in a flashback scene in this comic, it also shows us Jango's first encounter with Tyrannus on the moons of Bogdan, and he's recruited as the clone template. Jango takes the job not just for the credits or the grandiose of a clone army with his face. He takes it for a son. He demands that part of his payment be that he has an unaltered clone in his name, and the money and stuff isn't as important to him as that.
It's pretty neat because like I never really questioned it much before, because I just assumed that him and like Boba was just being raised on Camino because they're just kind of stuck there, like because Jango would have been living there the whole time Boba was around before Attack of the Clones.
Yeah, so this comic actually also answers that question as well. And Tyrannus, Count Dooku, right? He keeps his hood up and refers to himself as Tyrannus. He says to Jango that he would have to live on Camino for direct access for the Kaminoans to access his blood, right? Or to access his body and to be able to use him as the clone template. So aside from that, though, he said you would be able to conduct your normal business off-world, but we ask that you reside on Camino when you're not working, right? Which was kind of a fair request. So when we see them in Attack of the Clones kind of stuck there in that little house or the little condo, the flat, they're not exactly prisoners. Like they're there because that is their house, but they have free will to leave whenever they like. Okay. It just seems that it's a little prison-y situation because Obi-Wan comes after them and they're kind of trying to escape, and I guess the whole escape process is just like, oh, they're trying to escape Camino, but they're just trying to get away from Obi-Wan in that moment. So yeah,
I never read it as they were like prisoners there. I always saw it as that's where Jango was working because he was selling them his DNA essentially, and so they just offered him like somewhere to stay.
Yeah, so so that's basically this comic kind of answers that question. Like he's been training Boba on his jobs for, at this point in time, Boba is like 10 or 12 or 13 maybe at the very most.
And he doesn't have like growth enhancement, so he ages like a regular person. Yeah,
exactly. So this flashback sequence with Tyrannus happened around the time that The Phantom Menace ends, which is shortly after, of course, the Battle of Naboo and everything like that. It's kind of roughly estimated now in the canon because, of course, the Darth Plagueis book is no longer canon, but the time frame of that book is very, very well done. And I like to kind of mentally consider it as canon as possible. So, I mean, we can all roughly estimate that the time that Dooku and Palpatine kind of got together was very, very close after the events of the Battle of Naboo happened. And Maul was just kind of tossed aside when Tyrannus kind of joined him as an apprentice, and the whole Sifo Dyas thing happened. The whole creation of the clone army thing happened 10 years prior to Attack of the Clones. So yeah, like Boba's like 10 years old in the movie, and in the time that he's been training with his father has probably only been about 2 or 3 years before, because otherwise he would just been a little too young. This comic though is kind of supposed to be one of the first missions that he's been on with his father. So He doesn't really get a whole lot of training before Jango dies. It's just a really interesting little window into Boba's life, though, and the fact that he means so much to Jango to have his legacy not be in his career, but to have it in the form of a son that can carry that legacy on. And that's why Boba is so important. And that's like the creation of Jango in the prequels shouldn't diminish Boba's stature to fans. Whereas I know a lot of fans might look at Jango as just the rip-off copy that came later with the newer movies. But he's also intended with a purpose, and that is to give Boba the legacy of the Fett name and just to kind of build him up to be the character that we all know and love him to be, right?
That being said, George himself did say, well, needed a bounty hunter, so they like that one, so just made another one.
Yeah, I did. Well, fans like Boba, and I need another one, so made Jango Fett.
It's so funny. He's not wrong though. It made a cool twist of a character storyline.
Yeah, I did, and I mean, I never disliked Jango at all, but yeah, he's it's a Fett regardless of the matter, and it's cool to. We're actually going to get into this a little later because a lot of people could be angered about the fact that Boba's a clone. Boba doesn't consider himself a clone, and that's one of the most important things to remember as we continue through this journey of this character, because there's been a few times that's come up in the story where someone else calls him a clone or someone else refers to him as a clone, and he refutes that comment with some sort of comeback or whatever, because he isn't a clone to himself. He is his father's son. So that's the most important thing about this character. I think that we all have to remember, because it's not just Jango's clone Boba, it's Boba Fett. So I
did always wonder though, why did Jango go out of his way to get a clone of himself instead of just having a kid like a normal way?
He probably wasn't. He wasn't probably. I don't know. He's a bounty hunter, right? That's not the kind of life that you just kind of have a family.
So, you never know. Other Mandalorians do, don't they?
Yeah, but they're not bounty hunters, right? Like they're not outlaws. They're part of a creed, and a creed is a family of sorts to them, right? So
I will say Bosk then, because Bosk has a family, and they're all bounty hunters.
Bosk, yeah, but is that canon though? Because
I don't know.
I don't know.
Is it in the EU for sure?
Yeah, it sounds EU to me. There's some weird stuff that comes out of the EU. So we hit Attack of the Clones, and Jango and Boba run into Obi-Wan Kenobi on Camino. They make their escape and retreat to Geonosis, where the Clone Wars begin. And Jango perishes at the hands of Mace Windu in the execution arena. Boba loses his father that day, which is at this point the only person in the galaxy who is truly his family, because he was raised alone and not with clones by his side, like the clones consider each other brothers. Boba was raised independently as Jango's son, so he has no relationship and no connection to any other clone at all, even though they all share the same face. And this comes up in the Clone Wars TV show, which now we can kind of jump to, unless there's anything you want to bring up about Attack of the Clones.
I think it was just to point out that this is a really, really harsh start. It's almost similar to really what happens to, say, Harry Potter or to Luke himself. Like it's a very dark origin.
Oh yeah, for sure. And for a tough guy like Boba Fett, you wouldn't expect anything less, right? I mean, before Jango was even a character, I don't know if the question really rang true to like, oh, who was Boba's family like, and what was his father like, and how did he even get to be this mysterious, cool guy that wears this armor and kills people for a living? Like, who's raised that way, right? And so it's almost like me wondering, like, how did Bib Fortuna get to where he is, and what's his family like, right? Like, nobody cares, but everyone cares about Boba Fett.
I kind of want to know now, like, what happened to Bib Fortuna's family that he ended up being this like leader of, or like the right-hand man of Jabba?
You know what? I think here's my theory. The Fortuna family had a fortune, and they
There we
lost
go.
it all and sold their son off to this hot slime lord that take him and make him his butler.
This makes sense. I think you're onto something.
Throwing it out there to the story group, but yeah. So I'm like, when we hit Clone Wars, like Boba's like he's angry, like he hates the man who killed his father, right? So the first time that we meet this character in the animated show is in season 2, episode 20, called Death Trap. And then in the following episodes, R2-D2 Come Home and Lethal Trackdown, which is the final arc of season 2 of the Clone Wars. And obsessed with getting revenge against Mace Windu for the loss of his father, Boba uses his father's status as a template for all clones as the means of his first assassination attempt. These episodes also show the influence of Aura Singh as a mother figure who's twisted and evil, or at least a mentor to young Boba. And then in season 4, episode 15, although Boba Fett doesn't play the largest role in this episode, it is kind of a vital one because it features Cad Bane, which makes it even better. And he helps stage a distraction in the Republic prison. This is the same arc that Obi-Wan goes undercover as the character known as Rako Hardeen. And Boba and Bosk and stuff, they kind of like have this distraction thing that's put into place, and Cad Bane uses Boba to stage a distraction which causes the prison break to happen. And this Republic prison break is kind of known as like a huge event that happens during the Clone Wars, that a bunch of criminals got away in large quantities. Later on, we pick up in season 4, episode 20, called Bounty. And before he donned the iconic Mandalorian armor worn by his father, Boba had to prove he could lead and kind of be his own independent character, I guess. So working with a group of bounty hunters, including Asajj Ventress, who at this point becomes a bounty hunter herself, Boba Fett goes out of his way to ensure everyone knows he's in charge. And this is the episode where they have the train heist, which was a great way to feature this character. And by the end of the episode, Boba has not only worked with Dengar, Bosk, and a few other bounty hunters, but Ventress as well. And was a super cool episode. It was probably one of the best bounty hunter episodes of the whole Clone Wars show.
And that also was, I think, the first time where we saw Boba actually kind of have like a heart.
Yeah, we see it like an emotional side to Boba, because after the whole Mace Windu revenge thing is kind of resolved, I know we talked about that a little more extensively with Jess, like when we were talking about the legacy of Boba Fett. There's that moment where Hondo kind of takes him aside when Plo Koon and Ahsoka are questioning him for answers of where Aura Singh took a bunch of hostages, which are Republic troops, and Hondo kind of talks some sense into him and explains to him that his father had a code and that he was a respectful and honorable man who's told the truth even to his enemies. Like Kenobi comes asking Jango Fett like what the deal is, and he's like, I was recruited by a man named Tom Rannis on one of the moons of Bogdan.
It's true. He just tells
gives
him
it to
straight
him
up.
flat. He just killed. Yeah, and like the whole movie, Obi-Wan is told the truth by him, by Dooku, by everyone, and he doesn't believe a thing. It's like I don't know. It's like that's
It's
Obi-Wan's
funny.
problem.
It's a good point though, because if you're always expecting the bad guy to lie to you, then he tells you the truth, you're not going to believe him.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I mean, his story in the Clone Wars is great, and those are all the episodes that he shows up in. If anyone wants to follow his Clone Wars arc in the Clone Wars, and going through seasons 2, episode 20 through 22, and then season 4, episode 15 and 20 is kind of a great 5-episode story of just him showing up sporadically through that show, and you kind of see some evolving of that character, which is really cool. He does show up again in the Clone Wars, but this is kind of post-show cancellation. So the only episodes that you're going to be able to consume at this point is either in comic or novel form. And his appearances is specifically in the Dark Disciple novel, which adapted 8 episodes that were never made for the Clone Wars. But there's still canon and stuff. It's all in a canon novel. And Quinlan Voss, who's a Jedi Master, seeks out Boba and his bounty hunter group to locate Ventress at one point because he knows that she's had dealings with him in the past. And then later on in the story, Ventress travels to Chalmun's spaceport cantina on Tatooine, where she enlists the support of several bounty hunters, including Boba Fett, Bosk, Lats Razi, C21 High Singer, and Embo, who are mostly bounty hunters she worked with on the train heist job, to rescue Quinlan Vos from Dooku. At this point in the story, Dooku is kind of imprisoned Quinlan Vos, and if anyone listened to our Quinlan Vos What Happened episode, you'll know exactly where we're at with that story. As part of their plan, the bounty hunters stage a diversion by attacking Dooku's battle droids. Meanwhile, Ventress makes her way into Dooku's palace to get Vos. Unable to rescue Vos, though, Ventress is forced to retreat with her bounty hunter confederates. And as they leave, she catches a glimpse of Vos walking with Dooku, showing that he has indeed become Dooku's newest Sith apprentice. That, of course, is another story to pursue, and you guys can check out our Quinlan Vos What Happened episode. But the point is Boba Fett helped Ventress on the job of trying to rescue Vos, and they ended up failing that job. And that's the end of the Clone Wars, the prequel-ish era that we see him in, until he shows up much later.
Is it worth bringing up like the reels?
The reels?
Yeah, where we find out that Boba Fett became Cad Bane's apprentice.
Yeah, so it's a brief mention that these clips have not yet been confirmed as canon material because they have not yet been adapted into any current story. But yeah, he did have one final appearance in the Clone Wars show, which was also a section of it that wasn't made, where he ended up taking an apprenticeship with Cad Bane in a little bit. They kind of work together on a job of some kind, and we don't really know a whole lot of details about it. Dave Filoni talked about this arc at one of the conventions that they had in the past and revealed that Boba was kind of like under the mentorship of Cad Bane, who respected Jango a lot before he died, and then Cad Bane ascended to being known as the #1 bounty hunter of that time period. Cad Bane, having a lot of Western flair, obviously rubbed off a lot on Boba Fett, because now Boba's the guy that wears the spurs. He's got the kind of Western vibe about him. And so a lot of that inspiration comes from that character. And that was, I think, one of the coolest parts about it. That whole story arc kind of came to a close with some sort of issue that came up between Cad Bane and Boba, and it was over the morale of killing innocent people, I believe. And Boba decided not to kill a bunch of innocent people and decided to have a standoff with Cad Bane instead. When we watch the Bad Batch episode where Cad Bane comes face to face with Hunter, they have a very similar moment where they kind of have that gunslinger Western moment, like
the duel at high noon sort of situation.
Yeah, the high noon face off of it. Yeah.
The classic old West duel.
Yeah, which was pretty cool. This leads me to believe that this entire Boba Fett Cad Bane arc no longer happens in the canon. They're going to probably tell the story a little differently. But what I thought was really cool about this planned story was that they have this face off and they shoot each other at the same time. And Boba, wearing his Mandalorian armor, takes the hit in the head, and Cad Bane is the reason why he's got the dent in his helmet.
Yeah, to me, that's such a good story point.
It is so good.
Because Boba has always had this dent in his helmet, and everyone's always wondered what it's from. So
right, and it's from that moment. And I like to still believe somehow they're going to work that story into the canon somehow. But for now, it kind of remains in this gray area of like, this was intended to be canon in the Clone Wars, and then that arc just never came to be when Disney came canceling everything. So thanks, Disney. And then in that moment, Cad Bane also dies. He bites the bullet and dead, right? But now that we have the Bad Batch, we know that storyline doesn't happen, and
it hasn't happened yet.
Or it hasn't happened yet, or maybe he does end up taking a blaster bolt from Boba and not dying. So that's also a possibility. But I liked the story that Boba does kill Cad Bane, and
agreed. Yeah,
and that was that, right?
It's a really good ascendancy story for Boba, because his dad was the best bounty hunter. Cad Bane takes over, and for him to earn that right, Like, I don't think it should be Cad Bane retires. I think it needs to come down to Boba proving himself.
Yeah, exactly. So there's another thing they mentioned about the Clone Wars. There's a couple stories in which Boba shows up that Slave One changes hands quite a bit. And at one point, this is in the first story arc with Boba and Aura Singh. Aura she tries to get away in Slave One without Boba when he's being taken into custody by the Republic after this whole thing goes down. He tells the Jedi where the hostages are. Ahsoka goes after Aura Singh, pursuing the hostages, and Boba gets sent to the prison, which is where he later is in season 4. But prior to that, Aura tries to get away in Slave One, and Ahsoka takes Slave One down by cutting off the wing, and it crashes into the plains of Florum, which is a planet that Hondo lives on. Later in the Clone Wars, we see that Hondo has taken possession of Slave One and rebuilt it and fixed it and painted it in his own colors, which is the burgundy robe with the green highlights that he is commonly wearing. This is later the color scheme that Boba kind of goes with on the ship when he is a bounty hunter. He kind of just leaves that paint scheme there and fixes it up a little bit because it's slightly different in Hondo's garage, but the colors are almost exact to what it shows up in Empire
Do you think
Strikes Back.
he decides to own that color, like he likes it, or do you think he just too lazy to get it repainted?
I think Boba. Here's the interesting thing about Boba is like, and this is the reason why I bring it up, is because he has no father and he's such a young guy that any kind of mentorship that he gets from anyone, it rubs off on him, right? So like the Western flair of Cad Bane, that adds into the mix. Hondo's preferred colors on Slave One, you throw that into the mix, right? Like there's all these things that kind of just build on top of it that make Boba Fett, including living this crazy outlaw life at such a young age, which makes him this hardened soul. There's a lot going on there, and so out of the brief appearances that we do see this character in the Clone Wars, they're very crucial to like what he is later. So the changing hands of Slave One. We assume that by the end of the Clone Wars, he reclaims Slave One, into his own possession again. A suspected plot line, of course, now that we have the Bad Batch, I'm just going to go over this very suspected plot line, which is probably accurate, but just so that's out there. Since the first Battle of Geonosis, Boba had been considered a missing person by the Kaminoans. Without access to him, Prime Minister Lama Su turned the cloners' attention to Omega during the early Imperial era, intending to use her pure Fett DNA to create a superior clone model for the Galactic Empire as the new government was turning away from using clone troopers. Hiring the bounty hunter Fennec Shand, Dr. Nala Se frustrated Su's efforts by ensuring Omega was kept safe. Furthermore, Omega had joined the renegade clone commando unit known as Clone Force 99, who are being made aware of her importance to the Kaminoans, including her relation to Boba by Commando Tech. So they clue in that she's, of course, Omega is Fett DNA to the replica, except a different gender.
Pure blood, yeah.
Yeah, so she is kind of like how you have the Alpha and the Omega. Boba Fett is technically an Alpha, the Alpha clone, and Omega being the Omega clone. So I think that's probably why they called her Omega.
That actually makes sense. Yeah.
I just had to throw that in
beginning and
there.
the end.
Yeah, I just had to throw that in there because it does have something to do with Boba, and this could be a storyline that we then later see grow next year when we get season 2 of The Bad Batch.
What are your thoughts on that? On the next season of Bad Batch, if Boba shows up and starts becoming one of the main characters?
I think it's a much needed plot line detail that we need, whether it's told in the Bad Batch or a Clone Wars continuation with them doing those arcs that they never finished or whatever. Like, I don't really care how it's done. They just need to tell that story because Boba had such a presence in the Clone Wars TV show, and if he doesn't have a presence in the Bad Batch show, then gonna be disappointed. But as we know from the Bad Batch, they've been really focusing in on those characters and haven't really been like the Clone Wars had their moments where they had complete story arcs with other characters that weren't clones, and that was the coolest. That was where the show really got good because it was able to tell other stories that existed in this time period that didn't have anything to do with the Jedi necessarily, but they were really good stories and they developed some characters a lot, right?
Yeah. I know we talked about that a lot when we were actually actively watching the show, which is coming out.
Yeah.
Because I know that was one thing we were really let down by with Rebels, is they never did anything like that. It was always just the crew of the Ghost.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And so with the Bad Batch, I think you and I are both hoping that they end up doing what Clone Wars did, where they just go elsewhere. It's like, yes, it's called the Bad Batch show, but can we tell this story that has other characters in it that has nothing to do with Clone Force 99? And getting a Boba Fett story arc in that show, I think it's totally deserved. Like it could totally happen, and I'd be happy with that.
Did they, in the first season of Clone Wars, did they tell arcs of other characters, or was that not till season 2?
Oh man, I'm trying to remember exactly. They still somewhat involved the main trio, being Obi-Wan, Anakin, or Ahsoka, or Padme, or somebody.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it was later on that they got more comfortable trying to get away from that group, and I think with Bad Batch it could be the same thing. Like it's a new show; they're trying to get you used to these characters right away, right out of the gate. We start off with the overlap of Revenge of the Sith. It's all good. I think it's just after season 2 or 3, we should start kind of moving away from that focus and starting to get these other story arcs. I think that is kind of what that show needs to really thrive, just in my own opinion. I mean, some of the coolest arcs in Clone Wars are just Darth Maul and his brother. Like,
no, it's true.
And so, yeah, like I would love the Bad Batch to expand like Clone Wars does and go elsewhere in the galaxy and see other characters that have much needed to be told stories in this time period. So,
well, we know that Dave Filoni listens to the show, so he's probably writing it down as we speak.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, speaking of which, we haven't had him on the show for a little while. We got to get him back. Well, fake Filoni.
You got him on speed dial, don't you?
I do have him on speed dial. Maybe we can give him a call when this is over.
Oh, sure. Sure, he's got input for Boba.
Yeah, I'm sure he does. So moving on from the Bad Batch, we have A Galaxy's Edge issue number 2, which is a flashback story. Takes place during the time of the Galactic Civil War, which is kind of the Rebellion Empire era. Fett was regarded as an established bounty hunter who worked as one of Jabba the Hutt's go-to mercenaries. During the trade wars, Jabba considered hiring Fett to lead a mission to Megiddo to extract a given codebreaker, given being the species. Whose AJ6 cyborg construct linked him to an Imperial algorithm that created security codes. So this guy got very crucial Imperial information, and Jabba almost considered hiring Boba to go get this guy, which would have generated billions in profits used for smuggling purposes. However, the Hutt crime lord instead hired Rhodian bounty hunter Greedo, who considered himself better than Fett, but of course failed on the mission. Fett was present in Jabba's palace when the crime lord reprimanded Greedo, nearly throwing the Rhodian into his Rancor pit until the Ithorian Doc Ondor agreed to purchase a special lightsaber that the bounty hunter had recovered on the mission. This is Ki-Adi-Mundi's lightsaber from Order 66. He died on Megiddo, and his lightsaber was lost. Doc Ondor is, of course, from Galaxy's Edge. We know him as Doc Ondar from Galaxy's Edge. Anyone who's been to Galaxy's Edge, you'll know who I'm talking about. If you don't know, then he's a guy that owns a shop, and you can buy a bunch of stuff there. He's also known for his hobby of collecting relics of the past, and and being a lightsaber is like a priceless object to him. So he offers Jabba a price for the lightsaber that Greedo recovers from the mission that ends up failing, but because he buys the lightsaber for such a high, steep cost, because the value is absurd for this thing, it actually ends up satisfying Jabba enough that he doesn't kill Greedo after all, and thus ends that
Greedo
story.
gets lucky.
Yeah.
Because he ran out of luck this day, and so it wasn't there in the cantina in episode 4.
Exactly, yeah. And the reason why I bring this story up, because Boba doesn't really have a whole lot to do with it, but the fact that he's working for Jabba as a go-to mercenary during this time, and he's present in the throne room when this whole thing goes down, is just supposed to give you the idea that at this early on, even before episode 4, this moment, like, he has a working relationship with Jabba the Hutt. He's not one of his minions, but that's just kind of what he does. Like, he goes to Jabba for a lot of employment. So,
well, I'm sure he goes to whoever's the highest bidder.
Yeah, exactly. Like, whatever job's paying the most. So episode 4 rolls around, and we get a bit of an overlap story here because, of course, from the special editions or the movies that you'd watch on Disney Plus are all the latest Blu-ray / redistributed digital versions that have all the latest effects in it and everything. The added scenes, of course, where they put Boba in the docking bay 94.
Yeah.
That he shows up and does a little nod to the camera before he walks away.
Why?
So the book, we recently celebrated the 40th anniversary of A New Hope. Not that long ago. It was how long ago was it? It was a couple years ago now. I think it was the year that we went to Celebration. Actually, I think 2017,
right? Yeah.
Yeah. So around that time, there was a book that came out called From a Certain Point of View, and this was basically episode 4 retold in the format of every chapter is a short story told by a character that witnessed an event that happened during the course of the film. So it's basically like when you watch A New Hope and then you read From a Certain Point of View, you're basically experiencing that story again, just from other people's perspectives. And it gives you a real insight in one of the chapters called Added Muscle into Boba Fett. What has he been doing right before episode 4, which is kind of a cool little moment. So at some point before the secret mission to Tatooine, which of course is Leia trying to go to Obi-Wan Kenobi for help, Boba traveled to Coruscant where he encountered 3 rebel spies. After the spies attempted to engage Boba with ion disruptors, he disintegrated them using a weapon accelerator, which angered Darth Vader a lot, who refused to pay Boba for the bounty as there were no bodies. This becomes an issue later in episode 5 when he says, "No disintegrations." Boba originally planned to leave Tatooine, to which he had then journeyed to. He was on Tatooine around the time that the secret mission to Tatooine happened. After catching wind that Vader was looking for a couple of runaway droids, Boba changed plans in order to attempt to collect the bounty. He didn't get farther, though, than suspecting the 3rd resident of the suspected homestead had run off with the droids under much observation. So he basically went to the Lars homestead, saw the 2 burning bodies, did some tracking and stuff like that, saw that there was some footprints and clues that there was a 3rd individual that lived there, and he had no way of pursuing that person, but he assumed that they just took the droids and left, and it was kind of a lost cause. But that's why he's on Tatooine when Jabba comes face to face with Han Solo. He probably employed Boba to kind of go as some security effort or whatever, because he goes in person, which kind of makes no sense, but I guess he sends Greedo to kill him, and that doesn't work out, so he goes in person. But yeah, that's why Boba's on Tatooine. So there you go.
Well, at least they explained it, because I know when I first watched the special editions in the late 90s, I'm like, Boba Fett.
Yeah. Oh man. So Darth Vader, the 2015 comic series, rolls around, and this story takes place between episode 4 and 5. Marvel comic books, Star Wars Volume 1 and Darth Vader Volume 1, the first volumes of Marvel's newly relaunched Star Wars and Darth Vader comics, reveal a story of how Vader first discovered the identity of the young rebel who blew up the Death Star. Boba Fett plays a pivotal role in these events. Vader comes to Jabba's palace with business on behalf of the Empire and a personal mission. So Boba and the Wookiee Black Cranston are employed for his personal missions. Boba's mission on behalf of Vader himself was to capture the Rebel Alliance pilot who was associated with a man named Obi-Wan Kenobi and the smuggling vessel known as the Millennium Falcon. After extensive tracking, Boba goes to the cantina in Mos Eisley, where he interrogates a farm boy into revealing Skywalker's name and his history growing up with the boy near Tashi Station. Boba kills the farm boy and exits the cantina. He intercepts Luke at Ben's hut in the Jundland Wastes, who has gone there for information. Boba wins the fight, but is knocked unconscious by a box thrown or dropped on his head in the chaos, because there's a lot of smoke and everything, and I'm not entirely sure why this box falls on his head, because I read the comic, and it looks as if someone threw it at him, but only R2-D2's there, so it doesn't really insinuate exactly what happened, which is
doesn't he have a helmet on?
Yeah, he does. So apparently Beskar can block blaster bolts. It can't stop a small box with a book in it. He then later reports to Lord Vader that he was unable to detain the boy, but reveals to Vader the name Skywalker. And thus is Boba's involvement with helping Vader discover that he has a son. So that was an important moment for that character as well, because it also establishes he has a previous relationship with Vader. I mean, also a certain point of view also kind of added that in, but he's also a go-to guy for Vader to employ, as well as Jabba. All that's kind of a lot to take in. What do you think of him killing this farm boy? I thought that was a little weird, especially after...
It is odd.
Yeah.
Because I feel like it's supposed to insinuate him killing Luke. I don't know if it's like... probably wasn't a mistake.
It was so no, like, it was direct. So he basically ties up this boy who's maybe in his late teens, around Luke's age, right? And questions him about where Luke is, because he's the kid that Vader's looking for. And then after he gets the information he needs, he shoots him and walks away out of the cantina. So I don't know if it was just a matter of proving something to everyone in the cantina who witnessed the event, or if it was a matter of like, I'm doing it for the heck of it. But like that moment didn't really line up for me with how we know Boba Fett to be at this point in time.
I agree. Like, if before the prequels came out, this would seem in line because he was very ruthless.
Yeah.
But now that we know him to be the honorable son of Jango, it seems out of character.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. And he does a few things like that in the comics that were a little questionable. And
do you think that's the Aura Singh coming out?
I think so, because Aura Singh just killed anybody. Like, she was off the hook, you know? It's just the guy that we know from Clone Wars is clearly the same character that we see in the Book of Boba Fett.
Yeah.
That's the same character, right? Like, that they line up really well with holding promises and keeping one's word and having a code and all that stuff. This moment here was just so out there to me that I was like, he's got the information. He doesn't need to kill the guy. I mean, you know, I don't know.
Especially a kid.
Yeah, especially someone who is a bit younger. It just didn't really make a whole lot of sense. So anyone who does read those early comics of the Darth Vader and Star Wars series, like, you know, it just, I don't know. Maybe send in an email or something trying to explain it to me, because I didn't get it.
This is a little meta of an explanation, but it could be that it was early in the comics, and I doubt the person who wrote that watched Clone Wars. So they're probably basing it on the EU Boba Fett and the original trilogy.
That's true, yeah. And this is also something else to bring up at this time. We're going into major spoiler territory with all these things that maybe some of you guys haven't read yet. So, you know, just as a heads up. But the other thing is the canon does have inconsistencies. Much like the EU has a lot of inconsistencies, the canon still has inconsistencies. It's just that's the story that we're, you know, the timeline that we're going with as we kind of break down this character. Because, you know, let's be honest, all the stories told, you know, from here on out are the canon storyline. So let's move on to the next appearance that he makes in Age of Rebellion, which is the next big volume of single shot character comics that happened. And he's got his own comic in there called Age of Rebellion Boba Fett. Boba tracks down a bounty who is in fact a criminal bounty hunter himself, Known for not abiding by the guild's code of ethics or laws, Boba reaffirms the town that he saves from this man at the end of the story that he doesn't hunt bad guys, he hunts bounties. So yeah, it was a very quick, simple story, nothing overly confusing about it. He goes after a target, and people see this as a selfless act for saving their town, when in fact it just coincided with a target that he was after for the money. And he reaffirms one of the townsmen who says, "Thank you, you saved my sister's village," and all this and that. And he's like, can you come and get these other bad guys or whatever? And he's like, "I don't hunt bad guys, I hunt bounties." So
basically he's saying, how much you got?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Age of Rebellion Jabba the Hutt is also another issue that takes place in this volume of comics, and Boba's help is enlisted by Jabba to help trick the Tuskens into relying upon him for protection from the Jawas and Imperials or anyone else. Boba helps stir up a battle between all the parties interested in the Tuskens' famous wine brew called Tusken Wind, which is a rare and priceless beverage that is gifted to Jabba at the end of the story. So once again, working for Jabba the Hutt.
I gotta say, if you told me that they were gonna gift Jabba Tusken Wind, that's not what I would have expected.
Yeah, exactly. This is not to be confused with the same drink. At least I don't think it's to be confused with the same drink that is offered to the Mandalorian and Cobb Vanth in the Mandalorian show, when the Tuskens offer them that
those like really, smoke bomb things.
Yeah, those smoke bomb drink things. Yeah, I don't think it's the same thing.
Stink bombs.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Also, one more thing to clear up as we kind of move on from there to The Empire Strikes Back. I brought up something called the Trade Wars earlier with Galaxy's Edge comic, which has been happening around this period of time. The Trade Wars was a series of economic struggles between the intergalactic banking clan, the Hutt clan, and the Hutt clan during the Imperial era. And a bunch of things happened during this time period. And that's pretty much the only mention of the Trade Wars. But if anyone's wondering what that is, around the time that A New Hope was going on, there's a lot of kind of political dispute between the Hutts and the banking clan. So that's pretty much what that was all about. All right, so we've hit Empire Strikes Back, and Boba obviously is after the bounty on Han Solo and aids Vader on Bespin with the capture of Luke Skywalker, whilst also getting Han Solo as the reward, and then taking him away in Slave One, flying off into the galaxy, and never to be seen again until Return of the Jedi in the films. Of course, that's how we know the story, and yet this is where things kind of get interesting, because there's a whole year's worth of time between episode 5 and 6, and those events are now told in this comic book series called War of the Bounty Hunters, as well as the Bounty Hunters comic book lineup, which has been an ongoing series. And I had to do a lot of reading catch up today just to kind of get the gist of what's going on. But basically, there's a mini series called War of the Bounty Hunters. There is an ongoing crossover label called War of the Bounty Hunters. And then there's a couple series that cross over to make this crossover, which is the Star Wars ongoing series, the Darth Vader series, the Dr. Aphra series, the Bounty Hunter series. And then there was a couple one-shots that they sprinkled through this crossover event. So it's the biggest Star Wars crossover comic event that they've done to date. And there's a lot of stuff on the roster. So I did my best to try and go through as much as possible, and I believe I hit about 95% of all the moments that Boba shows up through this series. So hopefully I've covered it pretty well. So
that'd be very confusing jumping in the middle of an arc like that.
I started from the beginning and made my way through, and then went back and kind of did the layers, because they all overlap, like all these storylines overlap with each other. So I've tried to place them in as best of order as possible on this reading list. So I'm going to do a bunch of reading now, and then we're going to talk about it in just a sec. So War of the Bounty Hunters Jabba, which is a single shot comic mostly about that character in this crossover, takes place right after Empire Strikes Back. Boba helps a woman called Deva on a job, and this has happened in the past. She double-crosses him to help the target, who turns out to be working for Crimson Dawn. And at this point in time, Crimson Dawn is galactically wide known to be disintegrated at this point because, of course, if you think back to the Solo movie, which took place 5 years after Revenge of the Sith, it's been a long time since Crimson Dawn was a thing, and since then, Maul has also died, which was in Star Wars Rebels. So the leader of Crimson Dawn died. Crimson Dawn theoretically should no longer exist, and we haven't seen the character of Kira show up in the original trilogy at all. So in the story, they've painted this picture that Crimson Dawn no longer exists anymore, but it's kind of starting to come back. So this character Deva ends up killing the target, even though she kind of fights with Boba Fett. It's just a weird, confusing couple pages of what the heck is going on. She brings back the bounty's head and Boba's unconscious body to Jabba. Boba's fine. Crimson Dawn uses Deva to set up some of the events that take place in the War of the Bounty Hunters comic series. There's just this weird kind of like connection there. So the Jabba the Hutt comic was there to, at least I think that's how I read it, right? So someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but the Jabba the Hutt comic was basically to set up the events of the War of the Bounty Hunters crossover. Then we get into the Bounty Hunters continuing storyline. So mind you, when I say continuing story, I mean the issues for this series are still coming out, and characters like Boba Fett and stuff could still have more details to get into at a later date. But as of right now, this is kind of what is there. So after Boba agrees to help Bosk on a job with a crew he's never worked before, things don't exactly work out as planned, and the famed Nakano Lash, which is a mentor of Valance. And Valance is a character that Han Solo once knew in the Imperial Academy, who has since become a bounty hunter. So the famed Nakano Lash decides the fate of a girl's life, which is more important than the success of the job that she's working with Boba and Bosk and a bunch of other characters. The mission goes to crap when she makes this choice and basically screws over everybody, including Boba Fett. And it's his first big failed bounty mission in a long while, which affects his reputation. That's why it's important. He detours from course to Tatooine because, of course, this is just kind of backstory. He finds out that this person is in a particular location, and as he's mid-flight going from Bespin to Tatooine, detours Slave One to seek his revenge on this person. And to shorten that story, he finds his revenge, kills this Nakano Lash character, and he says, "Never betray a bounty hunter," or never. He says something in a little revenge line, but on the back of the comic book it says, "Never betray a bounty hunter, especially if it's Boba Fett." So that's why that story is important. He goes and seeks out his revenge on this character, but the most important detail of that, of course, is that he detours with Han Solo still in carbonite in his ship away from Tatooine, which is where he was supposed to take the bounty. So this is what causes all the ruckus because, of course, everyone wants Han Solo. He's like the most, expensive bounty in the galaxy at this point in time. So that's when
everyone's after him.
Yeah. So that's when we hit the War of the Bounty Hunters miniseries, which kicks off kind of the main crossover event. Boba runs into trouble with Han's carbonite and needs to stop off to see a contact that he knows on Nar Shaddaa to repair his carbon stasis, or he could die. And if Han Solo dies, he's really not worth much to Jabba. Needing some credits to pay for the repair job, he enlists in a fight arena for the money. He goes by the name of his father, Jango, and paints his armor black with nano paint to hide his identity. That part was kind of cool because he needs an alias, so he actually goes by his father's name, by Jango. And anyway, Boba dominates.
What is nano paint?
Nano paint is it's a paint that sticks to cloth and metal, and I guess he can clean it off really easily. Almost like what we would call like plasti dip or something like that. Like it's just it's not like paint that stays on permanently. It's like a.
That's what I wondered. What's funny?
Yeah.
Is he's trying to save that battered look?
Yeah. It's honestly like a black armored Boba Fett. It looked pretty cool when I was reading the comic. I was like, oh, I believe it. I can dig this. This is pretty sweet. So Boba Fett obviously wins all the matches, and at the end of the thing, his winnings end up going to a notorious man called Kanji, who had bet the wrong way in the fight arena, and forces Boba to walk away without his money, tells him to keep fighting for the rest of the winnings, but that this initial set of winnings goes to him for the loss of his other fighter or whatever. So he decides to take his losses and leave. Meanwhile, someone has stolen his score. Someone has kind of gone to where they were repairing, or where this guy was repairing Han Solo's carbonite stasis, and killed him and walked away with Han Solo and carbonite. And so Boba Fett loses Solo. A bounty is then opened on Boba on behalf of Jabba because he has failed to return to Tatooine on time with his score. Forloom and Zuckuss come after him, but Boba kicks Zuckuss off a ledge, bests him in a fight, and I think Zuckuss dies. And Forloom is also kind of destroyed at this point as well. He's also really ticked that they damaged Slave One to get his attention. Boba flies off to confront Jabba in efforts to clear things up when he discovers that Jabba's bounty was changed from Solo to Boba after he didn't deliver on time. Boba discovers the return of Crimson Dawn, who is responsible for stealing Han from him. And behind that, as we know, is, of course, at this point in the comics, big spoiler, is Lady Kira. That's what she's referred to at this point.
She's still around then.
She's still around. Yeah, she's ruling.
She's still Crimson Dawn.
Yeah, so when she goes off she leaves Solo behind and goes off because, she gets in contact with Maul and decides to seek power over love, I guess. This is where her story picks up again. Crimson Dawn hosts a large party, one that all the syndicates and crime families around the galaxy are invited to, including the Empire, which Boba plans to crash in hopes of recovering Solo. He has a run-in with Bosk, which is interesting to see the dialogue there, because of course we know that Bosk and Boba worked together quite a bit during the Clone Wars, and Bosk even had his back in the prison quite a few times. So seeing them kind of growing up a little more, of course they're kind of competing for the same score, and there's a bit of a rivalry going on there. So they actually acknowledged that in the comic, which was nice. It was, well deserved. He ends up tying up Bosk and winning the fight there naturally because, he's Boba Fett. He approaches Dr. Aphra and the party for aid in causing a distraction, which turns out that she's there as well for her own reasons. She recognizes him as a clone from his voice, despite being able to see his face from the hood that he's wearing to the party. So he's disguised and everything, doesn't have his armor on, but he's got a hoodie up, and Dr. Aphra can't see his face, but she can hear his voice. And she recognizes him from old holos that she watched about the Clone Wars because she's an archaeologist and knows history and stuff like that. So that was kind of a cool moment as well. But when she calls him out as being a clone, he just replies, no, I'm not. He just flat out says, I'm not a clone. Even though he technically is, it comes up again where he doesn't think of himself as a clone. He's his father's son. Kira presents Captain Solo to the party as a favor to a guest who bids the highest, where a lot goes down, including a fight between Vader and Kira. Vader shows up, crashes the party, demands that Solo belongs to him and everything. Kira makes a big stand about it and uses her martial art training that she learned from I guess what we know as Darth Maul and Dryden Voss. I forget the name of that, but they actually use the name of the martial art that she knows. It's the same martial art that Dryden Voss knows, and I'm totally blanking on it. But
I don't remember the name.
You know what I'm talking about, though, right?
Once.
Yeah, it's like a 2-word name for it. It's like Star Wars version of jujitsu or whatever. So she actually fights Vader, which is kind of one of the coolest moments because she actually holds up really well, but she doesn't have the force, so naturally she loses the fight. She's fine though. She gets away unscathed, but she actually has a plan as to why that happened, and it was basically to prove to everyone at the party, to all the other crime syndicates in the galaxy, that the Crimson Dawn is back, and they will not bow down to anyone, and they will even fight Vader, who no one is about to confront at this party. Like everyone's like, yeah, take him, it's yours. The only person who puts a stink of it is Jabba. And even who's at the party as well. And Jabba's like, you know what?
In person?
Yeah. And Jabba's like, you know what? Him and the Hutt Council. And Jabba says to Vader, you know what? Take Solo. Our relationship is more important. you know, because the Hutts are the esteemed, recognized #1 Imperial respected crime unit, I guess, like, and which gives them power over the other syndicates. So that status is more important to Jabba than getting Solo for revenge. So he decides to part with Solo after a bit of bickering.
It's crazy to me they crammed all this in between the flight of Boba Fett from Bespin to Tatooine.
Yeah, totally. So so the fight goes down between Vader and Kira. Vader wins the fight, has Solo sent to his ship. Meanwhile, Boba has struck a deal with Valance to help him reclaim Solo. Before they can intercept the shuttle, though, Hutt warships, not Jabba's Hutt warships, other Hutts that are bitter about the fact that Jabba bowed down to Vader, they interfere and attack the Empire on behalf of one of their own, which is Boku the Hutt, who's a member of the Council. Boba and Valance make it aboard the Imperial cruiser, the Executioner, that is holding Han now at this time. And Boba throws a detonator at Valance, and it explodes, and he basically leaves him for dead, telling him that if he wants another shot at Solo, to find him on Tatooine, where he will be. Boba comes face to face with Han's friends, which end up being Chewie, Leia, and Lando have snuck aboard this Imperial cruiser as well to rescue Han. And in a failed attempt to do that, an explosion goes off in which Han's carbonated body flies out of the ship and into the atmosphere of the planet below. Boba, having a jetpack, dives out after him and grapples him with the rope and brings Han and Carbonite back to his ship, which he then flies to Tatooine, and Jabba finally awards Boba for his efforts of capturing Han Solo. Boku's actions bring massive consequences, and this is going to play up a lot in the Book of Boba Fett. Vader slaughters all of them, all the Hutt Council members, for their actions of betraying the Empire and attacking his ship with their ships, leaving Jabba as the sole authority over the Hutt clans, because there's no other members of the council. Boba suggests Jabba kill Solo by the way of the Sarlacc pit for all the trouble that he's caused, and the fact that he doesn't ever want to see this guy alive again. And the story will continue. As far as Crimson Dawn goes, the story will continue with the miniseries called Crimson Reign, which is going to be coming out next month in December, with a follow-up trilogy, with a follow-up story to complete a trilogy in 2022 called The Hidden Empire. And this is all done by the same author, and I think it's done by Charles Soule, which, as we know, is one of the favorite Star Wars writers. So there you have it. Han Solo is now on Tatooine, and all is resolved. But what do you think of all that?
I'm surprised that they fit all that in. I never would have guessed that happened. To me, the coolest part is actually the fact that it explains why when we meet Jabba in Return of the Jedi, why he seems like he's the only Hutt. Yet there's a council of Hutts through all of the Clone Wars.
Yeah,
so,
I like that too.
To me, that's the coolest part, because I really did explain that. And to me, I had always kind of questioned what happened. I assumed we just didn't see any of the other Hutts in Return of the Jedi.
Yeah, you're right. And I've always questioned that too. So I was very happy when in the last couple pages of this series, after all this reading and everything, I come across those lines where it specifies him as the sole authority of the Hutt clans, or the Hutt, and I was like,
Hutt space.
Yes, finally, some clarity on this, because in the Clone Wars, it was brought up a lot that the Hutt Council is a thing, and if any big decisions need to be made, it needs to be made in front of the Hutt Council, and the Hutt Council hires Cad Bane to do some of the jobs that break Zero out of the Republic prison, and all this stuff. So it's important to know that now Jabba's the only guy in Hutt space that matters. Every other Hutt is met,
and on top of that, it also explains why at the end of Return of the Jedi, when Jabba dies, everything kind of collapses, because if there was all these other Hutts, then why would Hutt space no longer be a thing?
Exactly. Yeah, that's why it matters a lot, because it's like you would wonder well, if there's a Hutt Council, why is Bib Fortuna sitting on the chair and not somebody else, right? Why not Jabba's cousin or something? Well, it's because Vader killed him.
And Jabba has a kid.
Yeah. Rada. Okay, we have yet to get a story in which Rada
shows up.
shows up again. I think, yeah, like, I don't know, at some point
just-
maybe they're gonna tell that story, but yeah.
It's just so disliked that it just disappeared from canon.
Yeah, I'm not surprised, honestly. We'll get the story eventually, but for now, all that matters, Jabba's the only one left in the rulership era, and this is important, of course, going forward with the next set of stories that we have. So, Return of the Jedi, finally, we've hit that mark, and Boba continues to work under the employment of Jabba the Hutt for a couple jobs after delivering Solo. After Skywalker's capture and the day of the Solo Skywalker execution, as we know, things went very badly for Boba, and during an escape attempt, during a firefight, Boba fought against Skywalker, who used his lightsaber to destroy his blaster. In the ensuing chaos, Solo, still somewhat blind from the carbonation, was alerted to Boba's presence and swung out wildly with a vibro axe, striking Boba's jetpack as he took aim at Skywalker with his wrist gauntlet. The impact caused the jetpack to ignite, sending Boba slamming into the side of Jabba's sail barge and then tumbling into the pit of Carkoon known as the Sarlacc pit. That's his appearance in Return of the Jedi. So, very small, but one small segment of his giant story.
Yeah, but for a long time was the end of Boba Fett.
Yes, yeah, that's true. Yeah, for
It
a long time,
angered
that was it.
many fans.
Boba Fett. Who's Boba Fett?
Boba Fett! Boba Fett!
So at this point in time, we hit the Mandalorian, which takes place 5 years after the Return of the Jedi. Fett survived his fall into the Sarlacc pit, though he was separated from his armor, which was found by Jawas and later acquired by the Tatooinean sheriff Cobb Vanth. At some point, Fett acquired a Gaddafi stick and a cycler rifle. I'm assuming we'll probably get those holes filled in the Book of Boba Fett, possibly. It's possible that maybe he spent some time with the Tusken Raiders in a relationship there that coexisted for a while. And though a number of rumors about his fate circulated, Fett was presumed dead after his fall into the Sarlacc pit. He came across Fennec Shand in the desert and saved her life when she agreed to work as his partner after he rescued her from the fateful gut wound that she took from the blaster. I don't know how she even survived that, but it is what it is.
Yep, good point.
Vanth later gave Fett's armor to the Mandalorian bounty hunter Din Djarin in exchange for his help in killing the Krayt dragon that was terrorizing Vanth's town of Mos Pelgo. As Din returned to Mos Eisley and his ship, the Razor Crest, he was observed by Fett. After watching Din Djarin, Fett descended from a hilltop to where he'd been standing. So at the very end of that episode, we see the Mandalorian ride off on his speeder bike, and we finally are confirmed Boba Fett's alive, and he's standing on the hilltop looking out into the desert dunes, kind of thing. So that was a pretty crazy moment. Eventually, Fett departed Tatooine with Shand on Slave One, and together they tracked Din Djarin and Grogu to Tython. After a tense standoff about reclaiming his armor, Imperial transports were sent down from a cruiser and deployed stormtroopers in a skirmish against Din Djarin, Fett, and Shand. Boba took on several stormtroopers with a cycler rifle and Gaddafi stick, and then he sees the Razor Crest open and unguarded, takes the opportunity to reclaim his armor, and he comes back to the battle and ends it very swiftly. The Imperial stormtroopers literally running for their lives, and he finishes them off with his single rocket that brings down 2 ships. Badass moment, one of the best things I've ever seen.
I mean, Boba Fett's been gone for so long. They bring it back. They got to do something big, right?
Yeah. So he agrees to help him in his mission to recover Grogu in payment for his recovered armor. He also shows Din Djarin his chain code, which is built into the armor system and proves that the armor is in fact his and Jango's before himself. Fett then takes part in Din Djarin's mission to Morak, and he acts as the getaway driver in Slave One when he extracts him and what's the other character's name? You know what I'm talking about, right? The Imperial Scout Trooper guy. That
Oh, I know what you're talking about. Yeah,
I'm totally blanking on his name right now. I knew it
guy's
yesterday.
the comedian. Yeah,
Yeah, Bill Burr's character.
Bill Burr.
Man, Mayfeld, right? Man, yeah,
Well, that
Mayfeld,
sounds right.
Yeah,
sounds right.
I think it's Mayfeld. Yeah, so when Mayfeld and Din Djarin escape it's a narrow escape. Fett exits the getaway driver, drops the seismic charge, and they get away.
Yeah, as they dupe their way on to get onto what's his face's ship.
Yeah, Moff Gideon. Yeah,
That's the guy. Yeah.
So after acquiring Gideon's coordinates from that base, Fett and the group used Slave One to pursue an Imperial shuttle carrying Dr. Pershing. The captor of the Doctor, Slave One, lands on the desert planet of Lafete as Fett and Din Djarin enter a diner to speak with Bo-Katan and Koska Reeves. Din Djarin attempts to recruit Kryze to help rescue Grogu, but after she says that they would not find Gideon, Fett suggested that they leave. Upon hearing Fett's voice, she obviously recognizes him as a clone and not a Mandalorian. She says, "You are not a Mandalorian," and that angers him a lot. and this kind of disgraces and is a disgrace to his armor for insulting Mandalore by wearing it and not being a Mandalorian. So they have a bit of a brawl there, and it's broken up. But then they decide to help Din Djarin in his efforts to save Grogu and all this and that, because she knows that Moff Gideon has the Darksaber. So they go along with the plan. Following this, Boba helps in the final mission to infiltrate the Imperial cruiser by staging a chase with Bo-Katan and Din Djarin and the rest in the stolen Imperial shuttle. After TIE fighters come after Slave One, Fett disposed of the fighters quickly before jumping away into hyperspace, leaving the infiltration team to finish their mission and recover Grogu. Of course, we all know how that goes. They're saved by their necks by, of course, one Luke Skywalker, who shows up to claim Grogu after their communication event on Tython. This event is a close call, but never leaves Boba facing Luke Skywalker again, because, of course, they had the run-in on Tatooine only 5 years ago, and Luke is probably one of the people responsible for his fall into the Sarlacc pit.
Exactly, going down the Sarlacc pit. It's a good question, though. If they did cross each other's paths, would Boba want revenge on Luke? I feel like he wouldn't consider Luke the fault. Like,
no.
Boba's the kind of person that if he came across Han Solo, he might do something, but anyone else, I don't think he cares.
Anyone else, I don't think he would hold it against them. And also, I think at this point, he's kind of learned not to mess with a Jedi, because that's kind of the fate of his father. And even though he does have his quarrels once in a while, like on Jabba's sail barge, like with the fight and all this and that, it's just, I think, I don't know. To me, I decipher that whole situation as he was just doing that to maybe save Jabba's life in order to get paid again. Otherwise, he probably would have just flown away.
True enough. Yeah, he definitely didn't have anything in the fight.
No, yeah, he had no... aside from shooting Han Solo himself, he had no reason to be there. So, I think, if he ever did come face-to-face with Skywalker again, maybe there'd be a little bit of a tense moment, but nothing crazy. And I think it's wise that they chose to write the story the way they did in this episode, in the event that they never cross paths, because it just makes it all that more easy to just kind of go forward without those characters having crossed paths again.
Yeah, fair enough. No, I agree with that.
So prior to the Book of Boba Fett, we have a little post-credit scene in The Mandalorian where Fett and Chand return to Jabba's palace on Tatooine, which is now under the control of Bib Fortuna, or Big Fortuna.
Is that Big Fortuna?
Big Fortuna, as Reed would say. Fortuna expressed surprise at Fett's survival after he fell into the Sarlacc pit. So this gives us the hint that Boba's never been back to Jabba's palace since.
Which makes sense. It seems like from what we saw, he just got out of the Sarlacc pit and then probably lived with Tusken Raiders till we saw him.
I guess so, yeah. And it must have been under some very odd circumstance that Bib Fortuna wasn't there, that Fett was able to sneak in and steal back Slave One, because I'm assuming he parks at Jabba's palace when he's on Tatooine. Just my guess. It's just my guess, but you know, maybe
Unless
he
it
just
was
left
stolen.
it there. Yeah, unless he just left it there the entire 5 years, and the first time he flies off is with Fennec Shand.
Maybe we'll find out that Hondo stole it again.
Yeah. Well, you know, I'd love to know what he's been doing in those 5 years, but
So I would have thought it maybe was 5 years for him to walk out of the desert.
I
It's
guess
so far.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
I would walk 500 miles and I would walk 500 more.
So, without responding to Bib Fortuna's reaction that Fett is alive, he just shoots him and throws his corpse off the throne, taking his place on the throne with Fennec Shand by his side, which leads us right into the Book of Boba Fett. Show's coming out next month in exactly almost 4 weeks. It's like December 20, what is it? The 23rd or 24th or something?
28th, I think.
28th. Yeah, 28th or yeah, it's sometime at the end of December now, but that is almost like the full complete story of Boba Fett. Now, they could always make other stories like all our What Happened episodes, any character we do this coverage for, they could always come out with another story and then instantly that podcast is kind of out of date, but it's a very good like staple, this is what happened beginning to end, and anything new that they do, you know, it's not really going to change a whole lot of what we just went over. So
No, it'll only add to it.
Yeah, it'll only add to it.
It's not like the Great Purge where we got rid of all of the EU and start fresh.
Oh man, what a terrible day that was.
Yeah, it's funny because in my head, still Boba Fett does so much more.
Yeah,
but there's not actually that much that's canon anymore.
I think he just means a lot to people, right? And for those of us who had read the expanded universe stuff, you know, did you want to bring up anything notable in the expanded universe that maybe is worth talking about there? Because I know I want to bring up a few things too.
Yeah, there's a few things that crossed my mind. I'm not sure exactly where they were in the timeline. I think most of it is all pre-Return of the Jedi, and probably even pre-Empire Strikes Back. But there was I recall, and I wouldn't mind seeing again more involvement with like him versus the guild, because the idea with Boba always was he works outside the guild, and that's why he gets paid so much, because he was always contacted privately. And then the guild really hates him; they're always trying to steal his jobs.
Right. Yeah.
The guild was run at the time. The guild was run by Bosk and his family.
Yeah. And you know, it's funny that you bring that up, because as an expanded universe storyline, which I guess, you know, it would be not canon, it's possible they could canonize that in the Book of Boba Fett.
It's true. It kind of looked like it a little bit in the trailer.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's not the same, because it looked like it was the Bounty Hunters Guild. But at the same time, I think those are all like people he was trying to get him to join his like syndicate.
partners of Jabba that no longer have Jabba or Bib Fortuna to lead them. So he's claiming the throne, and they're wondering why they should let him, right? So
yeah, right.
I guess in bringing up that story about the guild and how he was a bit of an outlaw, it's possible that whatever he does in the show could affect the guild, like the Bounty Hunters Guild, right? Because
I want that to be a big part of the storyline, because that was always involved with what Boba Fett was doing, right?
Yeah, because in the trailer he states, "I'm no bounty hunter." Which it's very obvious he has been his entire life. So I'd love to know the event that happens, or the choice he makes in which the status of bounty hunter as a career no longer applies to him, and whether that is the guild kicking him out or him just walking away from that career in favor of ruling the Hutt clan is, you know, I guess we'll just have to wait and see. But yeah, like that's one of those storylines that as long as the character's around, they could always kind of bring it back. Yeah. And, you know, there's ways back into the guild, I'm sure. But yeah. That's a neat storyline, of course, that a lot of people loved.
And one thing we know is that he at least survives to the Rise of Skywalker because he's there to help attack with all the other ships.
Is it in the mix?
I'd have no idea, but it's probably in there. It means the fire spray's got to be in there somewhere, right? Like Slave One.
Yeah, it's got to be. It's got
They
to
have.
be.
I think they use every ship they could find, so it's got to be in there.
Yeah, I'm just gonna look this up. Is Slave One in The Rise of Skywalker? Let's just see.
The demise of Skywalker.
The demise of Skywalker. So it doesn't look like it is, or at least nobody's found it yet.
Yeah, found it, I think, is the key word there.
I mean, being such a notable ship, though, like honestly, it's some schmuck might have been like, hey, let's put this one at the front. I know what that one is. Not really thinking of the consequences. And I'm glad someone caught that if it happened and took it out, because I don't know. I'm not really feeling the whole Boba fighting with the galaxy against the Empire. Like
that being said, they could have had other fire sprays.
They could have, yeah. It could have been a different fire spray with a similar paint scheme. If anyone does find it, who knows? But it's such a cool ship.
We'll have to frame by frame to find it.
Yeah. So one of the storylines that I really loved. I mean, I brought this up when I was talking with Jess and you on the last episode we did about the legacy of Boba Fett and the documentary that we watched on Disney Plus. And one of the storylines that I really loved growing up was the Scholastic book series, Boba Fett, Boba Fett, the book series, which was, it was 5 or 6 Scholastic size, like kid size or junior style readers. So pretty quick to get through. Like, you could probably read the whole book in like 4-ish hours, maybe 5, but depending if you're a slow reader or not. But back then, like those are still really enjoyable stories, and it told the story of young Boba between episodes 2 and 3. So very similar to what we got in the Clone Wars episodes that we have him in. This series kind of introduced him into that underworld environment, and he crossed paths with Dooku, with the whole revenge against Mace Windu thing came up. He crossed paths with Dirge and Anakin and Ventress, and pretty much a lot of things that happened in the Clone Wars. And I guess that's one more thing as to why I appreciate the Clone Wars so much is, to me, it didn't necessarily canonize those events, but it almost took that inspiration and made it a thing of some kind, right? So again, like any big storylines in the EU that aren't canon anymore, like him not being in the guild, it could inspire a storyline that we get in the future, which we can all really appreciate.
It's totally possible.
Yeah.
There's another one that I actually would like to see back, even though it was a little bit strange, but it was a really unique story, and that's why I liked it. And it was the fact that I think it was a comic series, but it was dealing with Boba Fett, when he's in his later years, his DNA starts breaking down because he's a clone, and he needs to find a way to save himself before he dies, basically of cancer, just from the fact of being a clone.
That's another cool storyline. Yeah. And of course, being stories told between episode 6 and 7, there's really a whole not a lot there. And that could totally be a thing, that maybe he gets some sort of clone cancer kind of disease that, just starts to break down his body. And that would be really interesting, I guess, to see kind of the end of life consequences that happen of being a genetic replication. Like, even though he is pure genetic replication, maybe there is some sort of
like a flaw in the process or something.
Yeah, something that could come up, and that was kind of a cool. That's a cool idea as well. Which of course,
like it was just it was made a really unique story that was very unique to Boba Fett, and of course he's the only person we know who would have the skills to be able to seek out the kind of person who could actually help him deal with it too. So
right, yeah. And the one thing that makes this story so interesting, I mean, I'm really excited for Book of Boba. You're really excited for Book of Boba. A lot of people are excited for this show. But something that's definitely worth speculating about is we don't really know if this show has a second season coming out yet. They haven't talked about it publicly, that is. but we do know that Mandalorian season 3 is going to kind of build off of this show and the first 2 seasons of its own show, as well as Ahsoka and the other show that's going to cross over in that time period, which is what is it now? I'm trying to remember. There's a bunch of shows happening in that space, right? It was Rangers of the New Republic.
Yeah, Rangers.
And they canceled. Yeah, then they canceled that one. So
Well, postponed. We'll see what happens.
Postponed, yeah, taken off the production schedule, I guess. But so I guess my question to you is, I guess as far as this character goes, assuming that they don't kill him off in his own show, what kind of involvement are you hoping to see in the later, or do you want to see involvement of this character in Mandalorian season 3, and thus this kind of heir to the Empire era that they're kind of building us up to with Thrawn and the return of Thrawn and the Empire and all this stuff? What do you think is going to happen with Boba in that space of time? And following that, I guess, what would you like to see other than that clone cancer stuff, which would be kind of a cool storyline to bring back, but realistically, if the focus isn't on that character going forward, I don't know, how can we kind of anticipate seeing him again?
It's a good question, because they've made Boba move into a position that we never really saw him becoming a crime lord. So I'm not really sure where he's going to go from there. Is he going to get killed? Is someone going to betray him?
Yeah.
Maybe he'll try it. He'll get betrayed, and then you'll have to seek revenge on that person as his empire crumbles.
Yeah, because when the Empire, I guess, comes back, which is it can't be that big of a thing because they never really referenced it in the story so far between episode 6 and 7. But we do know that Thrawn's alive and the Imperial remnants do exist. So whatever ends up happening in the stories that they go forward telling, it's going to be a battle, but I don't think it's going to be a new whole war that happens between the rebels and the Empire, and we're not going to relive that story again, which tells me that Hutt space is going to be relatively unaffected. So if I were to throw any guesses out there, I would say that season 1 of Book of Boba is going to wrap up. If it's a success, they're going to carry on the legacy of that character in some way, shape, or form outside of the Mandalorian stories, and possible that we may even get a different show under a different title that could feature that character, but focus in on the underworld in general, and just
thought of an idea,
draw inspiration from that world, right?
So hear me out. In the EU, and we talked about this with Jess, Boba becomes Mandalore, right?
Yeah.
And Boba isn't really an honorable person. He's a bounty hunter. And so it didn't really make sense for him to become Mandalore. So what if, instead of becoming Mandalore of the Mandalorians, he becomes a crime lord and then eventually is the sole controller of the whole section of the galaxy that's Hutt space, and becomes a warlord instead?
Yeah, that'd be pretty neat. So you're thinking that might be something that'll come up in this show, or in following the show?
Probably following. I think this would be the first steps of him becoming a warlord. Think Attila the Hun, right? Controlling a large section of space. Because right now it's kind of up for grabs. Because like we said, Jabba's dead. The Empire's just fallen, and the rebels, they're not together enough to have conquered the space and have rule of law across it. So he could take over a huge section and become a pirate king or a warlord, right?
Yeah, that's true. And technically, I mean, kind of that's kind of what Jabba is. So yeah, by taking that throne. And this is kind of what I guess is curious about his line that says, I plan to rule with respect rather than fear, which is what Jabba ruled with. Boba is a guy that so far in his career has ruled with fear and intimidation by reputation. he leaves a reputation behind as you don't want to mess with Boba Fett, right? Which is kind of a fear tactic. So it's curious for me to see him say something like that, and with the true intent of ruling justly. And it really questions where the show's going to go, because yeah, it's not just about this character at this point in time. It's also about what's going on in the galaxy, and what is he planning on doing to kind of use that to his motto of, I'm just a simple man trying to make my way in the galaxy, like
I'm just a simple king trying to own my section of the galaxy.
yeah. It's like, oh, I'm sorry, Boba, you're no longer just a simple guy trying to make his way in the galaxy. You're now ruling hot space.
Yeah, but then like, what happens if he does rule that giant section of hot space and then gets into a squabble with the New Republic? Then there's like a war, like a pirate war.
Yeah, that could happen. A big pirate war would be pretty cool. Maybe we'll see characters like Hondo come back. We know he's still kicking around. There could be run-ins with, of course, a lot of. I mean, I'm really hoping that we see some of these bounty hunters return. I mean, having like Bosk show up again.
Yeah, because Bosk is still alive, right? He's not killed anywhere.
Yeah, Bosk is still around. I think Dengar is still around. This big War of the Bounty Hunter storyline also brought back all these characters, including a fan favorite from the old Clone Wars show, which is known as Dirge. And he also showed up in the old Scholastic EU Boba Fett books.
So Dirge is canon.
No. Yes, he is canon. As of like this year, they made him canon and put him in the War of the Bounty Hunter crossover event.
That's awesome. Is he? I haven't seen him. Does he look like classic Dirge from the old animated series?
Yeah,
nice.
Yeah, he's got the same kind of physique going on, and I assume that means he's still made of intelligent worms.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's pretty cool. I always liked his character. It's a really cool idea.
Yeah,
it's like this unstoppable force because it's an army of worms underneath like Beskar.
Yeah, so I mean, seeing a character like that come into this show would also be pretty neat. Even making him like the villain, because if you think about it, Boba Fett could be ruling Hutt space with this true intent of needing to do, needing to rule justly and this and that, and trying to get the Hutt Empire, the Hutt clan back on its feet again and make it his, and he could have a previous bounty hunter in his life that shows up again out of the blue, just turning themselves into a villain somehow by maybe they had a quarrel with Boba in this comic series that's been going on, or in the Bounty Hunter comic series that's an ongoing series, and that maybe kind of comes up again and just creates a new fruitful plot line for this entire thing. I mean, I don't know how they're going to end this Crimson Dawn storyline in the comics, but however they end it could also affect the Book of Boba Fett, going forward, because that third volume, well, the second volume is supposed to come out next month, but the third volume could also come out early next year. So, I don't really know how they're planning on wrapping that up, but maybe they'll leave it with, Crimson Dawn still around. Maybe they could be the antagonizing force against Boba's efforts to try and
it would make sense. I could see it being some like bounty hunter group, or like the
Pikes
underworld.
Or something.
Yeah, like Boba's alive, and then they want revenge on him for something he did, right?
Yeah, exactly. Something like that. There's lots to speculate on, and this show is going to be awesome. So really looking forward to that. But we have another question from Ellen, who sent one in, and she says, she says, how did he survive in Return of the Jedi? This story is not really, or this answer is not really clear, because obviously he survives, but how? My assumption is he's
the Beskar.
The Beskar.
That's my guess.
Yeah, the Beskar for one. The other could be the Sarlacc does take so long to digest stuff that maybe he does in fact get the jetpack working and flies out of it, right? But it's curious that he doesn't have the armor when
Yeah.
when he gets out, right? So
It could be that he got out with the armor, but then collapsed, and then he was robbed.
oh yeah, maybe that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the Jawas being their usual selves, and yeah, maybe he just got screwed over by some Jawas or something. Who knows? The other thing is, this is my theory is they will tell this story in the Book of Boba with a flashback. That's just my theory.
I think that's likely. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like something I think we're gonna get the answer to very swiftly when this show begins. I think what they're going to do to make it its own show is, this is all just speculation, all right? I'm just throwing it out there, but I think they're gonna start off the show with that scene, him just getting tossed in the Sarlacc pit, and they're gonna show exactly how he gets out. Maybe he launches a thermal detonator before he hits the bottom or something. Who knows? Then he gets vomited out or whatever, and loses the armor for whatever reason that is. And then it cuts to like him. That scene that we see at the end of The Mandalorian, it's going to play that again. Takes the throne. Story continues, right? I think something like that, I think, is going to happen to kind of give people the answer we've all been wondering. How does he get out? Right.
That makes sense. To do like a flashback right at the beginning, some way. Maybe he's talking to someone. Maybe like Bosk or Dengar like ask him like how he did it, and then he like tells the story.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, right at the beginning, I would think, just so that people who are watching this series and didn't watch Mandalorian like kind of get the story of why he's alive.
Yeah,
people
exactly.
who watch Return of the Jedi, but not Mandalorian.
Yeah, and the reason why I think they're going to play that scene again of him going to kill Bib Fortuna is that is either that scene is like halfway through or even in the first episode or second episode of the show. I think we're going to see that again because it's a very important moment where Boba does that and then takes the throne and makes it his. So we're likely going to see those scenes again in the context of an episode, and it's probably just a small fragment of some larger thing that happens. Secondly, yeah, him getting out of that Sarlacc pit's a really big storyline for people who didn't watch The Mandalorian, who want to watch the Book of Boba Fett, and yeah, he's alive, but like, oh, how did it happen? And you know, maybe they don't know he's got all the scars on his face from Mando and the gaffy stick cycler rifle. He's been on Tatooine for all that time. Like all those hints that we've been getting so far, maybe that's just not something that's going to carry over as well into this new show. So there has to be something there being its own identity of a show that they need to say, hey, this is where he's at and how he escaped death. Because as far as I'm concerned, this show is not just building off of Mandalorian. It should also be building off of Return of the Jedi.
Yeah, absolutely. It should be. Yeah, especially because now we're in Jabba's palace, right?
Yeah.
So there's got to be a lot more connection to that.
Exactly. Yeah, something. So
what do you think he's going to put in that Rancor pit?
I honestly, like, I don't know. I mean, maybe he gets into Rancor. I don't.
Shove some down there.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe he gets.
It'll be a swimming pool, and then he'll stand on it and use it as a slide.
Renovations to Jabba's palace, man. What would you do with Jabba's palace?
Air conditioning.
Yeah, it's a bit. I don't know. The moisture in there is needs some better air circulation. That's for sure. I think one of the last questions that we got is, what are the main character differences between the two? I think she's got a typo. She says the two Boba Fetta. That's probably meant to say Boba Fetts. The two Boba Fetts. I'm assuming that's meant for Boba and Jango.
Or is it Boba and Din Djarin?
That's true as well. That could also be a possibility. Let's break this down. So Jango, obviously being his father, there's kind of a very clear difference between the two of them. Character-wise, they're a bit similar.
Yeah. I mean, if you looked at them side by side, they'd be the same.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
One's green, one's blue.
Honestly, if I were to pick out any differences between Jango and Boba, is Jango has Jango has a bit more of a family-ish vibe about him. Like, obviously, the fact that he wanted Boba as his payment for being the clone template is a big deal to his character. And
He's more of a
something-
samurai kind of a character.
Yeah, exactly. Because he had the influence of his mentor, Jaster Muriel, right? I think that's what his name is.
This sounds, as I recognize the name.
Yeah, I think it was Jaster Muriel. But he had basically Jango had a Mandalorian person. Yes, yeah. So his master / mentor was Jaster Muriel. And in the canon, Jaster Muriel has no story. Like they pretty much have his name in that encoded holographic thing that the chain code that Boba shows Din Djarin. But in the expanded universe in Legends, he has a huge story, and he was also I think they even brought his name up in the Republic Commando comics or the Republic Commando books. But his biggest appearance was in Jango Fett Open Seasons, which was a Dark Horse comic series that kind of told a bit of an origin story for Jango Fett. And he also showed, he was mentioned in the Legacy of the Forest Bloodlines book, Sacrifice and Revelation, which were all really big staple storylines for the Solo kids and for Boba Fett. So he's brought up a lot in the expanded universe and has just one mention in canon. But basically, Jaster Muriel takes in an orphaned Jango Fett after after his parents were killed by some people, and I'm blanking on who killed them. There was some sort of I think there was some sort of civil war going on or something like that, and he had to, I think it was Jaster Muriel was opposed to the Death Watch at the time, which in canon, of course, we know the Death Watch in the Clone Wars, but something happened in the way that Jango's parents were honorable people and they died, and he becomes a bounty hunter, and Muriel is the guy who trains him. So Jango's got a bit of a more soft side, and honestly not as hardened as Boba is. And he had even though it was a tragic upbringing, I think this is his going off Legends, but can also be applied to his character in the canon. I mean, I don't know. As far as I'm concerned, I think even though they look the same and they're the same career and everything, there is a stark difference of background between Boba and Jango.
They're very different people. Whereas Boba's more of like a gunslinger, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like he's supposed to be that like a bounty hunter that rolls into town and like he's there just to get his guy and get out. He's very like that classic Old West character.
Yeah, exactly.
But I just wanted to ask a quick question if you have an answer to it, because, well, firstly, is Jango considered an actual Mandalorian?
Oh yeah, so that's a big question that, and by extension, Boba Fett, I guess this would apply to as well. So technically, the Mandalorian, being Mandalorian it's not necessarily a people, it's a creed. Right. So that's like the most important thing to determine who and who isn't a Mandalorian. Jango was brought up by Jaster Muriel, who is a Mandalorian. And so was his parents. So Jango, by extension, is intended to be a Mandalorian, but he walked away from the Mandalorian life.
Okay, that's
a
why.
bounty hunter. Yeah.
Because I was wondering, if he was taught and raised by Jaster Muriel, who was a bounty hunter, was a Mandalorian, you would then think that, because that's the origin of most Mandalorians, they're adopted.
Yeah.
So you think that would make Jango Mandalorian.
Yeah, and technically he is, and he also isn't, because he's not part of a creed. He's not part of the creed or a clan, but he was brought up in that life, right? And Boba, by extension, is not brought up in that life. Boba is Jango's son, which is his legacy. So so Jango, yes, was a Mandalorian and was at one point, and then no longer is. And in the Clone Wars, one of the characters who is the prime minister, all these names, man, who's the prime minister Almec. He's the guy, he's a prime minister of Mandalore. He says to Obi-Wan Kenobi, who comes asking about a Death Watch member who has the same armor as Jango Fett, who struck an attack on a Republic cruiser, killed a bunch of people or something like that. And he asks about Jango Fett and stuff, and then he's met with this retortive response that's just said, Jango Fett was a common bounty hunter. Like, how he acquired that armor is beyond me. And so, like, a lot of people, they might know the name of Jango, but they're like, no, he's not a Mandalorian. He can't be, because he doesn't represent anybody of Mandalore, right? He's acting on his own. The main
thing is, he's not a Cree or like a one under like a family, right? Like
exactly.
I think in the EU there was like a Fett family from Mandalore.
Yeah. Well, Jango Fett, like, even though he was brought up by Jaster Muriel, which is the guy who adopted him as a mentor and everything like that, Jango's father and mother were Fetts. Like, that's the Fett name is a Mandalorian.
Yeah, okay. Name. That's what I was kind of getting into.
Yeah,
Something that crossed my mind, just kind of funny, is from start to finish. So Boba Fett shows up, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi. He's super cool. So cool, in fact, that they make an entire race based around him, only for Boba and his father Jango to be kicked out of the same race.
It's funny how things work out, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we should roll around to the question of what's the difference between Boba and Din Djarin. The same kind of comparison is there. I mean, they're obviously way different characters when you look at them side by side. Din Djarin he's a true Mandalorian, belongs to a clan. His job and his code as a bounty hunter is embedded in his roots. Like, this guy is by the book. Like, if you were to meet a Mandalorian who's by the book, it's Din Djarin. Like, he's not a scumbag. He doesn't do any, like, he's a protagonist of the show. So even though he's a bounty hunter, he's not a bad guy, right? And Boba, as far as we know in canon, he is a guild member, but he's a bit more edgy.
True. Yeah. But that being said, Din Djarin isn't what we know of as a classic Mandalorian, but he follows the code.
That's right.
Like, properly, like a proper Mandalorian. But a traditional Mandalorian, as we've been like seen in the past, is someone who they live for the fight and nothing else. So they're always seeking a new challenge to best in combat.
The other thing to keep in mind about Din Djarin is he's actually, as we know from Bo-Katan's little comment, is he's actually a member of the Watch, which is kind of an offshoot cultist group of Mandalorians who have a different belief system in the way that Mandalore should be operated and run. So that's why his little saying, "This is the way," that's not something that all Mandalorians say, and it's not something Boba Fett would be familiar with. And so, like, his upbringing it's funny because we're comparing Jango, Boba, and Din Djarin, and if you think about it, none of them are authentic Mandalorians.
Yeah, it's true.
And yet they all wear the Mandalorian armor. An authentic Mandalorian is even Bo-Katan, like,
Death Watch. Death Watch is a traditional Mandalorian.
Yeah. If you think about, so basically all the characters we know, Bo-Katan is the most true Mandalorian that shows up in that show, because her sister was also Satine, who we know as the Duchess of Mandalore. So like, I think Bo-Katan is about as close as it gets. And even though Bo-Katan had the more military aspect behind her, more of an aggressive means to rule Mandalore, whereas her sister was a pacifist, Bo-Katan is a Mandalorian in the sense that she has a clan. She's got the whole armor thing going on, but she isn't restricted to taking her helmet off like the cultist group. She doesn't have the "this is the way" saying about her. She believes that about the dark saber being the ownership of the ruler of Mandalore, and follows the code of the dark saber by having to best the person that has it in order to claim it and all this and that. Like, she's the most Mandalorian that as it gets. Din Djarin doesn't give a crap about the Darksaber. He just almost gives it to her. He's like, I don't care about this. Like, you know, rule Mandalore for all I care. That's what makes him not a true Mandalorian, even though he is called the Mandalorian and the show is called The Mandalorian. He's only kind of a Mandalorian because
it's an offshoot.
It's an offshoot, and truly, he doesn't really. He's not familiar with the Darksaber.
Protestants and Catholics.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. Yeah, because if you ask a Protestant about some of the stuff that a Catholic is like, even though there's such a similarity there, it's like there might not be a whole lot of familiarity with each other, right? Right. So yeah, it's kind of the same thing, which is very ironic when I think about it, because I'm only as I'm talking about it realizing how kind of ridiculous it is that the show is called The Mandalorian and technically
he's not a Mandalorian. Yeah. Something that I think is quite funny is a lot of people's biggest complaint about the reveal of Boba Fett as a kid is you see him without his helmet on, because the original Boba Fett was the man with no face from the old West movies. Right. And so what Dave did is he made a whole series based around the original concept of what the fans saw as Boba Fett.
Yeah, pretty much. And
they made it into a cult, which is even funnier because there's basically a cult of fans that think that's the way it should be.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, we're talking about Din Djarin being essentially Din Djarin is the legacy of Boba Fett as an outside behind the scenes kind of reason. The reason why we have shows like The Mandalorian, or a show like The Mandalorian, is because Boba Fett is awesome. Like, that's the only reason why we have a show like that.
And, for sure.
Yeah, and so, like, you know, that's you know, that's all I have to say about that, because and now, of course, now we have the Book of Boba Fett. Fans of The Mandalorian should be really, really excited about this show, not just because it's the follow-up to season 2 of Mandalorian, but it's because Boba is the inspiration for The Mandalorian, and this show is based on that character. So, you know, if anyone loves that show, we should be like doubly excited for this one because it's Boba Fett. So, you know, I hear everyone around the planet right now listening to this who's a part of the Boba Fett fan club going like, yeah,
he's Boba the Fett. His backpacks got jets. He bound a hunt for Jabba the Hutt to finance his vets.
I think it's time we call Dave. We got a few minutes left, so how about we give Dave a call?
Give him a ring. Yeah, see what Dave's up to.
Yeah, let's do it. You know what? Let's go to the cantina and give him a call from there. All right, here we are. Yeah, let's grab that empty table over there and give him a call. All right, give him a call on the holo projector, shall we? Let's do it. Hey, Dave.
Hey, what's up, guys?
Oh, hi, Dave. Dave, how's it going?
Oh, you know, it's going good.
Yeah, I'm sure you're really hard to working on the Book of Boba Fett coming out here pretty soon.
Oh man, you have no idea. John and I, you know.
Well, I'm sure there's still lots of advertising and probably doing the last final cuts of it, getting it together. Don't mean to interrupt it, is all I'm saying. We're really looking forward to it. Think it's going to be a really good show.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Man, you know, it's going to be one of the best shows that fans have ever seen. I mean, Boba Fett returning to Star Wars and having his own show is just crazy. I mean,
that's true.
It's unbelievable to be able to make this with Robert and John.
Just had to get rid of George and then you could bring him back, huh?
Yeah, you know, George never really understood the fans when it came to keeping this character around, and I think it took all the fans pestering and whining about it for so long that he decided to make Jango and so on and so forth. If you haven't watched the documentary.
That's right. Here we are looking up. It's nothing but clear skies ahead. Now, Dave, I don't want to take up too much of your time, so maybe just let me ask you. Can you give us one sneak peek spoiler, maybe what's coming up in Book of Boba Fett? We're all really anxious to find out.
Yeah. You know, I would have suspected that you guys were gonna come around asking for something.
Is Hondo in it? Is Hondo in it? We all want to know. Is Hondo gonna be in the Book of Boba Fett?
I'll give you one hint. The show's about Boba. All right, see you guys.
Oh wait, Dave!
What, Dave?
Man, you know that Dave, he's got away with fans. That guy.
Yeah, you know, if you look up tease in the Webster's dictionary, there's a picture of Dave Filoni.
Oh, tell me about it. I mean, it's right next to the definition of fan servicing. All right, so is there any last minute thing that you want to bring up before we wrap it up?
I think we covered it all pretty good. I'm excited. It's gonna be a lot of fun. We're about 1 month away, roughly, and I think it's gonna be a really good show. I really do.
Yep, it will. And we can all look forward to that on December 29th. So until the next podcast episode, I guess we'll catch you in the next one. Blake.
Got a blast.
Thank you guys for tuning into the podcast once again. Best way to help us out, dropping a great review, some stars, and of course sharing the show with a friend. All the ways to get in touch with us here at Star Wars Escape Pod are in the description below. And if you thought this episode was great, feel free to tag us on one of those social media handles, whether it be Instagram or Twitter or whatever. And feel free to send your comments, questions to our email or our direct messages or whatever. And sometimes we get back to you, sometimes we don't. But, we always love to hear from everybody. And, of course, anyone who sends in a voicemail. So shout out to all you guys who've been sending in voicemails. It's always great to hear your voice and hear what your thoughts are on questions that we ask for questions of the week, which I don't think we've done for a little while. So question of the week being, what do you think is going to happen in the Book of Boba Fett? I mean, it's right around the corner. Now that you know a lot more stuff about this character, what are your hopes and wishes for the show and your suspicions of what's going to happen? Because hopes and wishes can be different on speculation. So, they don't need to be the same thing. Columbia has just launched a sportswear lineup of Boba Fett inspired jackets and sweaters and stuff, so be sure to check it out. If you like Boba Fett, you might find some of those pieces of apparel worth buying. And with this show around the corner, you're going to see a lot more Boba Fett stuff on the shelf, so keep an eye out for all that stuff. And also keep tuning in to StarWars.com for Bring Home the Bounty for weekly releases of new products on the shelf. Until next time, guys, may the Force be with you, and we'll see you in the next episode of Star Wars Escape Pod.